すいません。
はい。
抹茶の入ったカクテルとかできますか？
もちろんです。かしこまりました。
Today's video was brought to you by my debut feature film, Matcha Vanilla, out now on Gaga Ooh La La. Which A-plus list movie star was helped out by the death of James Dean? Stay tuned to find out. There is not just one, but two A-plus forever movie stars. So, what if James Dean had lived? What would this parallel universe have looked like? Maybe no Fonzie. So, hi. I'm Hamish Downie and the director of Matcha Vanilla and the What If Marilyn Monroe Had Lived video essay. So hopefully you enjoy this one as well. Do you think he would have been as iconic had he lived? Maybe, maybe not. Well, let's take a look at what kind of films he might have done. If this is your first time, welcome. In my What Ifs, we look at what the artists have achieved in their lifetime, then look at factors that led to their untimely demises, and then look at the films that they might have done had they lived. The films I choose are based on my research of ones they are connected to, the ones that I think they might have been good in as well. So that relies on a bit of my ability as a director casting a film. And finally, sometimes I ask an actor friend to act as if they were that artist in a scene in one of these projects. Sounds good? Let's get to it. My friend Christopher James has made a wonderful portrait of James Dean specifically for our video today, and we'll be seeing them throughout the video. And if you would like to purchase this painting or a print, the description will be in the description box below, or there will be a QR code on screen. Also coming up, Bob Werley and Vikki Ann will be doing a wonderful performance of The Corn is Green. So for those who don't know or may need a quick recap, James Dean is part of the celebrated artists of the 1950s like Marlon Brando, Marilyn Monroe and Elvis Presley. Like Marilyn, he died young, so unlike Elvis and Brando who had comebacks in the 70s, Dean is forever linked to the 1950s. Dean is especially linked and tied to the 50s rebel youth culture. There have been a few actors who epitomised the sensitive young bad boy in the golden age, from Robert Walker and John Garfield to, of course, Marlon Brando and Montgomery Clift, both from the actors' studios like James Dean, and then of course James Dean, who was very inspired by Brando. You could have argued that he was the Jane Mansfield to Brando's Monroe. Brando may even agree with you because he wasn't a fan of the young upstart, just as Marilyn was not a fan of Mansfield. Okay, so you could argue that the early films and music of Elvis Presley would fit into this category. It is interesting to note that Elvis was inspired by James Dean, specifically his role in Rebel Without a Cause, but more about that later. James Dean first rose to attention in the 1951 Family Theatre anthology TV series in the film Hill Number 1. It's an interesting title. So Hill Number 1 was a respectful interpretation of what might have happened among Jesus's followers in the 3 days after the crucifixion. The story is told in the modern context of the US Army Company stationed in Korea during the Korean War. Dean played one of the apostles. Thanks to this, a small James Dean fan club was started, and he and his intimate friend William Bast even attended a meeting. Pretty nice. Interestingly, if you think of him going from an apostle to, this rebel bad boy image, you could almost say he was very similar to one of his later disciples, Colin Farrell, who would go from playing a beautiful, pure young priest on Ballet Kiss Angel to his work in Hollywood playing Alexander the Great, which, of course, and now, of course, he's a man who wants to be turned into a lobster if he can't get married. I love Colin Farrell. Okay, so Dean then moved to New York and studied briefly in the Actors Studio and appeared in the 1952 play See the Jaguar. Fast forward a few years later, when Ella Kazan had decided that Brando and Clift were too old to play teenagers in the new film East of Eden, he auditioned 2 young actors, James Dean and Paul Newman. Dean got the part. Now, this led to more work for Warner Brothers in Rebel Without a Cause, followed by Giant, where he takes a major supporting role alongside Rock Hudson and Elizabeth Taylor. During the post-production of Giant, his agent negotiated a 9-picture deal with Warner Brothers for $900,000, which is about, at the time of recording, $9.9 million in today's money. So nothing to sneeze at for an actor who, at that point, his films hadn't been released yet. He took the young Dennis Hopper under his wings during Rebel and got him the role of the eldest son of Rock Hudson and Elizabeth Taylor in Giant. And now talk about going from this pure innocent boy to what we all know that Dennis Hopper became in, the likes of Speed and Blue Velvet. That's career progression, let's just say. So, as we know, James Dean bought a race car and passed away in an accident. And a legend was born. So much talent snuffed out in an instant. The only major motion picture he saw released was the East of Eden. So he had no idea what he would become, the icon that he became. Had he lived, I'm sure both of these films would have still been huge hits. Now I'm talking about Rebel and Giant. But I'm not sure we, the audience, would have connected with them in quite the same way. It wouldn't have had the same bittersweet feeling of watching a major star being born posthumously, such as Heath Ledger in Dark Knight. But I'm sure that Rebel Without a Cause would still have been a huge hit with the kids, and Giant would have propelled him into the A-list without the enormous tragedy of his death. I want to quickly talk about the factors leading to his death. These are, of course, my opinions. I have to make some assumptions based on what the people around him have said. Both the people who were closest to him and loved him, such as Bill Bast, and those who didn't love him, such as Marlon Brando, say that he could have very dramatic mood swings. According to Brando, Dean would often call him, leaving messages with Brando's answering service. Brando would sometimes listen silently as Dean instructed the service to have Brando call back. Brando, disturbed that Dean was copying his lifestyle, the motorcycle, the bongo drums, and acting techniques, much like Marilyn and Mansfield, did not return his calls. The two met at least 3 times on the set of East of Eden in 1955, on the set of Desiree, and at a party where Brando took Dean aside and told him he had emotional problems that required psychiatric attention. Okay, so if Dean did in fact have undiagnosed and untreated bipolar disorder, it would explain why he might have bought a very dangerous car that Star Wars actor Alec Guinness had even warned him about, and took it for the joyride that ended his life. I'm not saying that this was definitely the case, but if it was, it would explain a lot. In this scenario, James Dean would need to have been diagnosed and treated for his bipolar. It was a long time ago, but they had already discovered that lithium was a very effective treatment for this condition, and I'm sure that Warner Brothers would have made sure that their golden boy had the best treatment that money could buy. Now, Dean, unlike Marilyn Monroe, had love in his life. He and Bill Bast had just moved in together. So goodbye anyone who doesn't like that sort of thing. So he and Bill Bast had just moved in together, and Bill was working on a screenplay for Dean. Dean was accepted and treated as a second son by Bill's mother, so he was not without a support network. So while he did have the same kind of vultures that Marilyn Monroe had had to deal with, if you read his wonderful books, The Surviving James Dean and possibly City of Night, you might have an idea of what kind of vultures he had around him. He did indeed have someone at home who loved and cared for him, unlike Marilyn. Now, these are my opinions, so I've asked my dear friend and mental health advocate Ellen Manning to answer some of my questions.
What we know is what we know about everyone.
Yeah.
What we know is what happened to him. And what we know is that he had a traumatic childhood.
Yeah.
What we know is that he had a terrible life experience.
Mm.
And what we know is the time that he spent learning, growing, and developing, he wasn't given all of the tools that he needed.
No.
And then he was thrown into a unreal world and expected to have 20 years of experience and 20 years of learning that he was never given. And when you think that the human brain doesn't stop developing until 21, and they reckon that humans don't reach maturity until their late 20s, early 30s, it's a lot of presumed knowledge and expectations that he was handed a role to play without being given the script.
Because my videos are like what ifs. So, like, what if he did have bipolar, I feel like not many people really understand beyond Jekyll and Hyde what that actually means. And
I think more and more diagnoses have become descriptive rather than prescriptive.
mhm.
And even though we've come a long, long way from, oh my God, they're nuts, lock them up,
Right.
which is what mental health always was. If you
Yeah.
were a rich family, then the crazy auntie or the crazy brother was kept in the attic.
Yep.
If you were a poor family, they were put in an institution and left there.
That's right.
And we've come a long way from there, but we still don't know what to do with people who don't fit the norm,
Right.
or people who are troubled, or people who require extra care. We know to like a certain percentage of how to help them and to stop them from dying.
Right.
But we don't really know how to help people to live. And if he did have bipolar disorder, maybe he would have been medicated. Maybe he would have been one of the people that medication made them feel like an empty tomb. And he wouldn't have taken his medication anyway, because all of their creativity, all of their identity, all of their enjoyment is taken out. And it takes away the risk factor, and it takes away the things that make other people uncomfortable and that bring them suffering, but it also takes away the things they enjoy. It's just one of those, I think as people, we look for answers and we look for reasons and we look for a way to understand it, and sometimes there just isn't a way to understand it. And if he didn't have bipolar, then the next thing that gets assumed is borderline personality.
Right.
So what if he didn't have borderline personality? What if he wasn't able to make connections? What if he was always afraid of being abandoned? What if he was always afraid of failing?
I did look up whether lithium would have been available, and it did seem like in the 50s it was there, but then I guess the fear is you're going to be put into a sanitarium and lock the key and throw it like Francis Farmer was.
Yeah, but there's always a fear of anyone who's different.
Yeah.
And up until the 80s or 90s, homosexuality was a mental health disorder.
That's true.
If you have a look, there's a lot of things on the internet where people are laughing at reasons that women were institutionalized.
Novel reading.
But, well, novel reading. On the same list is wanting too much sex, not wanting sex enough.
Right.
On the same list is being too emotional, not being emotional enough.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the time it was just if the family and the spouse and the children couldn't cope with difficulties that someone was having, stick them in an institution. If you're rich enough, you stick them in the attic. If you're not rich enough, you stick them in an institution.
Right.
You want to think that if anyone famous or valuable or special had lived in these days, that we would have fixed them or helped them or prevented them. But the fact is, you've got your Kanyes, you've got your Britneys, you've got your everyone, and all the money in the world and all the help in the world. And if you come back to James Dean, was he trying to be a man? And was it because there was no one confirmed or denied that he was gay, but there's rumours and suspicions and everything that he was? And
Likely
was he
bisexual. Like he when he passed away, he was living with his intimate partner, let's say for YouTube's sake.
But was he trying to prove he was a man by doing all of these things? Because at the time, homosexuality was still not just socially acceptable, but a mental disorder.
That's right. Yeah, you have a great point. It definitely rings true for me. What do you think? For the full interview, please come back next week, or if you can't wait, click the link below to the unlisted video. Now, according to those who knew him, Dean could be hard to get along with. Okay, he was difficult on set, which could be the kiss of death for a career. If you've ever wondered why your favourite actors aren't getting roles, well, this is likely the cause. Of course, the Me Too movement has highlighted how, in some cases, difficult can also mean difficult to sleep with, which is something Bill Bast alleged was the source of Rock Hudson's unhappy feelings towards the young Dean. It could also be the clash of styles. Old Hollywood and the method were very different. Joan Crawford felt discomfort at John Garfield looking at her in the eyes. He's looking at me in the eyes during their takes, which seems funny to us now. So he did this during the making of Humoresque, and Crawford was used to the old Hollywood style of just making sure your face was best angled to catch the light, maybe here, and not concerned with the other actor at all. So they allegedly made up and became good friends. Anyway, but back to Rock Hudson, who was an expert at dealing with keeping his confirmed bachelorhood under wraps and befriending the press. If Hudson had taken Dean under his wing, plus perhaps Dean had been treated for his moods, Dean could have avoided the circling sharks of Lolly Parsons and Hedda Hopper, who were only too happy to ruin the careers of people they despised. And I could imagine had Dean lived, he probably would not have wanted to have played their games. I certainly wouldn't have. So, like the proverbial firework, thanks Katy Perry, James Dean's star burned very brightly, and then he was gone too soon. Director Ella Kazan, who made Dean's first major motion picture, East of Eden, did not believe that Dean would have been able to sustain the momentum of his career. He felt that Dean's career, had he lived, would have sputtered out, as he was not well trained and relied too much on his instincts, as opposed to his idol Marlon Brando, who, contrary to what people believed, had been a very well-trained actor by his acting teacher, Stella Adler, same one as Marilyn Monroe, and relied on that training to create his characters. Now, you know, I'm no Ella Kazan, but I don't believe this to be true. Now, Dean was friends with Elizabeth Taylor, and look, she seemed to have every man, gay, bi, straight, in love with her. And believe me, she's the only person who could have ever played Cleopatra, aside from Cleopatra herself. Now, this is some insider knowledge from my sister, who trained under an acting teacher, Anne Fenley, in Newcastle, who had worked with Sir Laurence Olivier on stage. Now, she knew that whenever Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor came into town, they took acting lessons. Now, You can definitely see it in the quality of Taylor's work in the 60s. And I'm sure that James Dean, who was curious about learning everything, would have tagged along. I mean, look, if acting classes were good enough for arguably the greatest actor of his generation, Richard Burton, and Sir Laurence Olivier, let's say, they would have been good enough for James Dean. So I think he would have got the training he needed. Okay, now, this is what you've all been waiting for. Let's look at the films that James Dean might have done. He was contracted to do 3 films and 1 TV anthology film. Think today's Black Mirror, if you don't know anthology. And was in talks for 3 more films. That's 7 projects already. He has also asked his intimate friend, screenwriter Bill Bast, as I said, to write a film for him. There are a couple of films that I think he would have been perfect for. So once we look at this list, I think we can assess Kazan's statement. I don't agree. But anyway, it's hard for me to imagine his career beyond that, to be honest. But I will certainly give it my best shot. Okay. Now, just before his untimely death, his agent, Jane, I'm going to call her Jane Darcy, negotiated a 9-picture deal, as I mentioned, over 6 years with Warner Brothers worth $900,000. Dean's next project was to be a television version for NBC of Emmeline Williams' play The Corn is Green, in which he was set to star with Judith Anderson, the Australian actress most famous for her role in Hitchcock's Rebecca. The Corn is Green is based on a Welsh play about the young life of, a famous actor. It's a semi-autobiographical work of the playwright, who grew up in a coal mining town and not dreaming of anything bigger than being another coal miner. I'm sure we can all understand that feeling. But an English teacher spots his talent. Good old English teachers. And begins to tutor him. And as we know, he wrote this story. He's become a great writer. Now, this was first brought to the screen by the one and only Bette Davis to much acclaim, and when the television film was finally made, had Katharine Hepburn in the Davis role. I mean, these are some pretty big shoes to fill, but Judith Anderson was a great actress. Now, having Dean in the role of the young writer would have been incredible, and I would have loved to have seen Judith and Dean battle it out. So stay tuned until the end, as I've asked Japan-based American actor Bob Werley to recreate the famous monologue from the play in the sort of pseudo-American style that Dean would have had to do because of the Hollywood system. Now, at the time of his death, he was also signed to play Al Francis on the television series Playwrights 56, in the episode The Battler. Now, the role went to, guess who? This is going to answer your question from the beginning, Paul Newman. Now, his next films were to be Somebody Up There Likes Me, a Robert Wise biopic of boxer Rocky Graziano, for which Warners were loaning him to MGM, and in which he was replaced by Paul Newman. Newman also replaced him in the role of Billy the Kid in the western The Left-Handed Gun in 1958, which was co-written by Gore Vidal, so maybe they were thinking of James Dean's private life there. 3 other roles which he was being linked were the leads in Gun for a Coward, another western with Fred MacMurray in the lead, This Angry Age in 1957, which was about a family struggling in French Indochina in the 1950s. Dean likely would have been in the Anthony Perkins role. And Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, which would have reunited him with Elizabeth Taylor. And obviously the role of Brick, which would have been James Dean's role, would go on to be played by Paul Newman to much success. So it's easy to imagine Dean in this role. Had he done Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, he likely would have also done Newman's role in Sweet Bird of Youth, and giving that connection to Tennessee Williams. I think Dean would have done great work there. Now, while still alive, they did compete for the same roles, such as in East of Eden. So while we might feel that they are different types of actors, at the time they were considered to be the same type. Would Newman's career have been able to reach the same heights without the death of Dean? All of these roles helped make him a star, although are perhaps less remembered than his subsequent films like The Hustler, Sting, Cool Hand Luke, and of course Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. But it is really hard to imagine someone as handsome and talented as Paul Newman never being given a chance, but the truth is Hollywood is filled with handsome and talented actors and actresses who have not been given their shot for one reason or another. So it is possible that we would have never have known Paul Newman in this alternative universe. But I also don't think it's as easy as saying that James Dean would have done, say, The Hustler, Cool Hand Luke, and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and Newman would have become a car salesman in Cleveland, let's say. Paul Newman is one of the great stars of cinema, and I'd like to think that he would have found his place with or without having Dean in his way. Just would have taken him a bit longer. Now, James Dean may have chosen to go behind the camera as director. As a writer friend of mine once said, all roads lead to directing. Even the makeup artist wants to be a director someday, so possibly. Now, as his friend Dennis Hopper had said, now Dennis Hopper, acted with Dean in Rebel and Giant. They became good friends on the set of Rebel, and Dean even helped Hopper get a part in Giant. Now, in the 2000s, Hopper said that he thought that Dean would have gone into directing because he was tired of, and I quote, some jerk behind a camera telling him to stop every 2 minutes. So I'm guessing this is a relatively direct quote, or maybe it's how Hopper felt because he also went into directing. But more on that later. So, as he was getting frustrated with the directors he had, despite having 2, if not 3, of Hollywood's best directors. Now, look, if he had, I believe that the project he would have chosen to direct himself would have been William Bast's modern retelling of Jekyll and Hyde that he talks about in Surviving James Dean. Perhaps he would have worked with Elizabeth Taylor on this project, or maybe another friend like Eartha Kitt. Perhaps he would have hired his friend Paul Newman, and Newman's career would have started that way. I would definitely see James being a great director. he certainly had artistic vision. And I mean that sincerely. I'm just smiling because I get so many comments that I have no charisma. So, here goes. Okay, so now to jump forward in time, as we are talking about Dennis Hopper, I did say I was going to say something more. I believe Dean would have done a cameo for Easy Rider, which was directed by Dennis Hopper. Likely in the role played by famed record producer and convicted murderer Phil Spector. So, but I think that would have been a fun role. And if you think of Dean in the end of Giant, you can kind of imagine that kind of role. So, okay, so as I mentioned, Paul Newman was the first A+ star that I talked about, but who is the other? Remember, I said there are two. I've actually already mentioned him. So when you think of stars of the 50s, we think Marilyn Monroe, James Dean, and who? Stay tuned. Now, Dean was set to star in the major motion picture adaptation of A Stone for Danny Fisher, a serious early novel by Harold Robbins that looks at the effect of the Great Depression on a lower middle class Jewish family. In the mid-1920s, a young Danny Fisher and his family moved to a new house in a Brooklyn suburb. Within a few years, however, the Great Depression begins and Danny must use his one talent, boxing, as a means of supporting his family. But he gets mixed up with the wrong people. Now, written in 1952, it is set in the period up to 1944. This seems perfect for John Garfield, in all honesty, and it is quite similar to his part in the film Humoresque. Obviously, he played a violin in that, not a boxer, but the same idea. But obviously, he'd already passed away at this point and was likely too old. So that said, with both actors contracted to Warner's at one time, it seems possible that had both men lived, they would have acted together in this film, perhaps as father and son. Now, I know you might be commenting, but John Garfield was an independent at this time. Yes, he was, but his films got distributed by who? Warner Brothers. So, there you go. Okay. Have you guessed who it is? It's probably hard to tell. But after Dean's death, the film was retooled from a gritty urban drama to a vehicle for Elvis Presley, King Creole, in '58. Elvis even modelled his acting style on James Dean. You can decide how successful he was. But, his granddaughter is a great actress, so perhaps, with the right director, he could have been as well. Now, King Creole also featured Caroline Jones, who later found fame as Morticia Addams in The Addams Family. Da-da-da-da. The connection to Dean doesn't stop at Elvis. Dean was also friends with Mayla Nurmi, I'm probably mispronouncing her name, otherwise known as Vampira, a character that was itself inspired by the Addams Family comic strip. Now, you probably know her best from Plan 9 from Outer Space, but I don't think she would be happy about that connection. Now, okay, I think we can see from this list that Warner Brothers was pushing him towards the, at the time, highly lucrative genre of the Western, and he would have played a number of working class heroes and anti-heroes, including a couple of boxers. So that's kind of an interesting way that he might have progressed in his career. Now, the biggest role that I think he would have played had he lived, and this is obviously not one he was contracted for, would be Tony in West Side Story. Now stop, hear me out. So he would be alongside his Rebel co-star Natalie Wood. They had great chemistry. And just look at the fellow that got to play Tony in the 1961 film. Who does he look like? Could it be James Dean? You know, like we saw in the films with Marilyn Monroe was scheduled to play, the actresses who replaced her were often dressed up to look like her. So I think it's pretty definite that, you know, James Dean was on Robert Wise's mind. Now, you might think he'd turn it down, but don't be so sure. James Dean was originally considered for a role in Oklahoma, but they ultimately passed on him. But he did have an interest in music and dance. He liked African tribal music and Afro-Cuban music, as well as classical, such as Stravinsky, jazz and blues, Billie Holiday, and pop, Judy Garland, of course, and Frank Sinatra. His favourite song was Holidays When Your Lover Has Gone, and his favourite album was Sinatra's Songs for Young Lovers. And his favourite book was The Little Prince. Could he have been a song and dance man? Okay, he did take an interest in dance, learning the Katherine Dunham technique at Eartha Kitt's Watts Centre. There were also friends, some say intimate friends. He idolised Marlon Brando, who had also tried to be a song and dance man in Guys and Dolls, and he was also friends with Eartha Kitt. Look, Hollywood is a small town, still a small town. Look, had he done Somebody Up There Likes Me, he would have been directed by Robert Wise, who went on to direct his co-star Natalie Wood in West Side Story. If Dean had kept his youthful good looks long enough, I could see him starring in West Side Story, re-teaming with Woods. Although, in a perfect world, Rita Moreno would have been in the leading role, not Natalie Woods in Brownface. He was also scheduled to work with Vincent Minnelli, who was the musical director at MGM. Might he have done something with him? I could see Dean possibly doing Lust for Life about painter Vincent van Gogh, or definitely Tea and Sympathy about a college boy accused of homosexuality. Although neither of those films were musicals, so I think West Side Story probably would have been it. Perhaps Sweet Charity with Shirley MacLaine. I would have liked to have seen their dynamic together. This would have put him in an interesting position heading into the 60s. Beyond West Side Story, I do struggle to see James Dean in the 60s. Perhaps because he was so strongly associated with the 50s. I can see him in Cleopatra with Elizabeth Taylor. If he'd done those westerns, I can see him in The Magnificent Seven, perhaps Music Man. Could he have done films with Hitchcock or Kubrick? In this period, I can see him doing more directing than acting, or possibly returning to the stage. I think I can detect a growing divide between what James Dean wanted to do with his career and how Warner Brothers wanted to pigeonhole him. Perhaps he would have been one of the first to go independent, like Cary Grant, and fight the system like Bette Davis and Olivia de Havilland did. But then he wouldn't have had the protection of the Warner Brothers machine. That said, the studio system didn't last very long into the 60s anyway, so he wouldn't have had that protection. So what kind of films would have he directed? I can see him probably doing the Tennessee Williams adaptations, probably a western or a boxing film. When someone dies so young, it is hard to know how or what they will develop into, despite the idea in Japan that the 3-year-old spirit never dies, or, show me the boy at the age of 7 and I'll show you the man. Could you have predicted Robert Redford's career, or Paul Newman's, Shirley MacLaine's, Elizabeth Taylor's, even Rock Hudson's, you know. Dean certainly had a rocky road ahead, but if he managed to navigate it, I believe that he would have had a long career, possibly even an Academy Award for one of those early films. Before we go, I better talk about his potential posthumous career. That's right, I'm going to talk about Finding Jack. The film his estate has agreed that he will be in, or at least a recreation of him will be in. Sounds a bit like The Matrix Part 4, if you ask me. Okay, so Finding Jack, adapted from Mari Sova from Gareth Crocker's novel. Finding Jack is based on the existence and the abandonment of more than 10,000 military dogs at the end of the Vietnam War. Oh dear. Dean will play a character Rogan considered a secondary lead role, so he's going to be in it for a fair bit of the movie, not just a cameo. Now, while this sounds like it would be a nice movie, well, I imagine it would be a nice movie. Perhaps one he would have liked to have played in had it been made in the early 50s. However, this CGI zombie they plan on using will not be James Dean. What is exciting about James Dean is that as an actor, you never really knew what he was going to do next. He used to give a different performance in every take he gave, much to the frustration of some actors and directors. But this made what he and other actors did exciting to watch then and now. As exciting as watching a play live on stage. The excitement of just never knowing what's going to happen. A computer can only give us pre-planned moves, not the excitement of James Dean. I mean, even if they hire an actor, put dots on his face and have him act, and then have somebody else recreate the voice, and then do that, the stuff they did with Will Smith, or this, the deep fakes, which can look pretty amazing on a small YouTube screen, but on the cinema, I don't know. I mean, even if they get the look right, it's going to be that little bit of uncanny valley, I think, because you're sort of like, looks like Dean, but not really acting like Dean. So, interestingly though, as Dean mumbled his way through the final speech in Giant, thanks to his method acting style, they needed to dub his lines in the scene. As Dean had already passed away, a friend of his was asked to mimic him, and actually I think they did a great job. I certainly couldn't tell, although if you look at the scene, they do cut away from Dean quite a lot and show him from a distance, not so much up close. But, it worked. I couldn't tell. He did have Dean's original performance to go on, so I still have that doubt. Can it be recreated from scratch? The other thing, here he comes again. Elvis hasn't left the building just yet. They originally considered using the likeness of Elvis Presley, so there's that connection again. So I don't think they seriously wanted James Dean. They just wanted the gimmick, I think. If they really wanted the right actor for the job, I would suggest using Montgomery Clift's likeness. The role certainly sounds like his debut in The Search. But, Montgomery Clift's, notoriety, I guess, with the public is not as strong as James Dean's, unfortunately. Now, I did ask a lawyer and producer friend about this. Now, this is not legal advice, but he pointed me towards portrait rights law, which governs, your ability to grant someone to use your likeness. While Dean's estate owns the rights to his image, it's hard to know exactly what Dean would have thought about this. On one hand, he did say that, as a youth, that the measure of a great man was to be remembered after his death. So in that sense, Dean fulfilled his fantasy. This would certainly help his legacy to continue, especially among the younger generation who refuse to watch black and white movies. Oh dear. Or anything before 1990. Or maybe even now they're saying anything before 2000. I don't know. Look, Audrey Hepburn's CGI likeness was used in a commercial in Italy recently, and it's okay. But she doesn't speak, so it works, because, it's sort of a continuation of her Roman holiday kind of vibe. I just think it'll be too uncanny valley. As I said, again, how could you know what choices Dean would have made as an actor? Chris Evans of Captain America fame came out against this when it was first announced. So this may be a question that SAG, the Screen Actors Guild, will need to raise with their actors in the future. Do you want your likeness to live on after your death? And if so, can you be compensated while you are still alive? Something to think about. I've asked Japan-based American actor Bob Werley for his thoughts on this pressing issue.
Well, when it comes to this AI, CGI, I guess AI, what you want to call it, about James Dean being recreated to play a role in an upcoming film, I don't have a problem with it if it is something that just like a short little bit. But if it is actually creating this James Dean character to be the lead, the main actor in a film, and it's supposed to actually be James Dean, that would give me pause, I guess I should say. I mean, I don't know the full content of what is being proposed here. But again, if it's just like a short little thing, like, if you're doing Back to the Future and you have to show somebody in that time period, and it's like a quick little, like a cameo in a way, and you wanted it to be James Dean, and if you could use the AI to create a realistic James Dean, not just an impersonator per se, then yeah, I would love that. I think that would be a cool addition to the movie or the storyline. But yeah, if you're taking an actor who is obviously now deceased, and then using him or her, created by AI, to be him or her for the entire movie, for the main character, the driver of the movie, that I wouldn't like, because it's then making your interpretation in a way of what James Dean would have done as that character or as himself, and that's not authentic. Again, if it's just a recreation of what James Dean had already done, and they use that would be fine. But in any other case, no, I just can't agree with it. Without really seeing it and understanding more, I just can't agree with it. And those are my 2 cents.
Interesting. Now for the performance, I've asked Bob Werley and Vikki Ann to act as James Dean and Judith Anderson respectively in a performance of The Corn is Green. I hope you enjoy it. So with today's performance of The Corn is Green, I did mention to Bob to do a kind of American Southern accent. The Welsh accent is pretty difficult, and perhaps James Dean would have done this type of accent, and actually this sort of Welsh cadence lends itself very well to that rich American Southern accent, so I hope you won't mind that. To give you a bit of behind the scenes, I did tell him to play it as if he were talking to someone he respected and trying to convince them not to love him, basically. It is a heartbreaking scene, but it is one of the key dialogues in the film. So I hope you enjoy this next performance.
I shall not need a nail file in the coal mine. I am going back to the coal mine. I do not want to learn Greek, nor to pronounce any long English words, nor to keep my hands clean, because I was born in a Welsh hayfield, and I always lived in a little house with no stairs, only a ladder, and no water. And until my brothers was killed, I never sleep except 3 in a bed. I know that is terrible grammar, but it is true. The last 2 years, I have not had no proper talk with English chaps in the mine because I was so busy keeping this old grammar in its place. Trying to better myself. Trying to better myself the day and the night. You cannot take a nail file into the public bar. I've been there every afternoon for a week, spending your pocket money, and I've been there now, and that is why I can speak my mind. Because you are not interested in me. How can you be interested in a machine that you put a penny in, and if nothing comes out, you give it a good shake? Evans, write me an essay. Evans, get up and bow. Evans, what is such subjunctive? My name is Morgan Evans, and all my friends call me Morgan. And if there is anything gets on the wrong side of me, it is calling me Evans. And do you know what they call me in the village? The school mistress's little dog. What has it got to do with you if my nails are dirty? You mind your own business.
I had never meant you to know this. I have spent money on you. I don't mind that. Money ought to be spent. But time is different. Your life is just beginning and mine is half over. 2 years is valuable currency. I have spent 2 years on you.
Thank you for checking out this performance, and if you liked it, all compliments go to Bob and Vikki. If you didn't like it, all complaints go to me. And as I mentioned, thank you Christopher James, who has been doing his wonderful painting throughout today's video. As I mentioned before, if you would like to purchase this, please check out his website in the link in the description box below. Christopher James is an artist working in the northeast of England. He primarily paints in acrylics and mixed media on large format canvas, but also works in printmaking, mixed media, and photographic image making. Perhaps one of his biggest known pieces of recent one is his portrait of Marlon Brando, and I hope you'll check out his work with James Dean. So if you've made it all the way to the end, thank you so much. It's really, it means a lot to me because, this particular one I've been writing for 6 months, so I do hope sincerely that, you liked this, and you know, we really lost a great talent with James Dean. So yeah, be sure to please comment below and let me know what films you would have liked James Dean to have played. Do you think he would have done the Paul Newman films? And please feel free to check out some of my other What If videos in the playlist linked at the end. Chris White's James Dean portrait that you've seen getting painted as we made this is available for purchase now, or the prints are also available at the link below.
すいません。
はい。
抹茶の入ったカクテルとかできますか？
もちろんです。かしこまりました。
Today's video was brought to you by my debut feature film, Matcha Vanilla, out now on Gaga Ooh La La. These videos are free to watch, but they're not free to make. So if you enjoyed it, there are lots more for you to enjoy. It would really help me out if you subscribed. I'm on my way, but not definitely not there towards monetization yet. And I hope you enjoy. If you liked Bob and Vikki, they're in my What If Greta Garbo Made More Films post, so I hope you'll check that out. Again, thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. What videos would you like me to do next? Thank you so much.